All right. Well, the trip was initiated because people here in Oslo invited me to come speak at a convention or a conference, a gathering that they're having here. And for that purpose, I was asked to speak on media and actually later today on participatory economics and tomorrow on IOPS. So I haven't really spoken on those two things yet. And in London and also Reading and in the UK, I spoke pretty much on IOPS and participatory economics. And the goal, when I now go speak in Sweden and Belgium and France and so on, Germany, is to try to bring to people some information about this new organization, and on the one hand, and in some cases they've asked me to speak more on economic vision, so it's one or the other, and trying to convey something about what these are in the hopes that people will then go and look further and see what they think.
Most people still not believe that there is alternative to capitalism, because Soviet-style socialism, which was only alternative, collapsed. So people don't think that can be something more. Mm-hmm. Could you describe participation society and give a hope to people that there is alternative? Mm-hmm. Really, it could be alternative.
Yeah, I mean, it is a big question, but I'll try and do it reasonably succinctly. I suppose you could say participatory economics emerged first, and then following upon that and enlarging into other domains of society, there emerged a focus on politics, participatory politics, kinship, culture. The idea is roughly to have some values that we really aspire to, that we really hold dear, and then to conceive of institutions that would be consistent with those values. So the values are solidarity. People should benefit as others benefit, rather than benefiting at the expense of others. We should have mutual aid. We should be linked in a positive manner, solidarity. Diversity. We should have diverse paths of development, not least because if we only have one and it's wrong, we're in deep trouble, but also because there are diverse desires and diverse solutions to problems. There isn't only one solution to most problems, and so diversity should be a value that's in the forefront. Decisions have to be made in a society or in an economy, or in kinship, in daily life, in family life, regarding culture. Decisions have to be made, and choices have to be made, and the question becomes, well, how much say should one have in those decisions? Should they be made by some elite, as is typically the case now, where most of the power is in a few hands, or should there be some more encompassing and more participatory approach to decision making? And the value that's put forward, in addition to participation, is self-management. And the idea there is that people should have a say in decisions in proportion, roughly, to the degree they're affected by them. So that we don't get to decide, I don't get to decide to just do anything I want, because my doing just anything I want could mean you're left not able to make decisions in proportion to the degree you're affected. So it's a social situation and it's a social result, but we should have collective self-management. And then there's another fourth value, which is equity, which has to do with essentially distribution. The distribution of life circumstances, the distribution of wealth, our share of the social product. How much stuff do you get? How much do I get? How much does somebody else get? And the value there is called equity, and what it really means is that we should get a share in the social product based upon how long we work, how hard we work, and the onerousness of the conditions under which we work, as long as we're doing socially valuable work. So we don't get it for property, in other words, profits. We don't get it for power, just because we can take it, because we're stronger. And we don't get it because we're more productive due to using better tools, say, or perhaps even to some genetic endowment that we have. We don't reward that. We reward duration, intensity, and onerousness of socially valued labor. Okay, so if those are our values, and different people might have different values, but I find those to be, and the advocates of participatory society find those to be quite positive, and to represent and be consistent with a society in which you don't have sectors that are highly privileged. So you don't have class hierarchies or race hierarchies or gender hierarchies with some at the top and most at the bottom. Instead, you have real equality, real equity. So if those are our values, then the question arises, how do you conduct life, social life? How do you conduct economics, production, consumption, and allocation? How do you do legislation and adjudication, political activity? How do you bring up the next generation, live in households or in living units? How do you have cultural celebration? How do you do these things that are part of social life in a way that furthers those values, instead of doing them in a way that destroys those values, which is typically the case now? And that's a social vision. That's an institutional vision for a different way to organize life. We can talk about some of that if you like, but what participatory society is about, and that's what IOPS is about, is conceiving of the minimal set of structures that we need to have so that our social activities, our production and consumption and adjudication and so on, or our social activity that composes a society, will further those values that we hold dear rather than destroying them. And the IOPS, the International Organization for Participatory Society, then unites people who believe in that vision and who also share certain commitments and certain beliefs, I suppose you could say, and commitments regarding how to go about getting to that future situation. To motivate people to believe that there is a future, one has to describe the institutions and rebut criticisms and so on. It might take longer than you have, although I'm happy to answer more if you like.
We had discussion in Dublin, and I heard from some other people who is doubted about IOPS described that is a revolutionary organization. What is, in your opinion, of meaning a revolutionary organization in our case? Because many people it associate with Russian Revolution or revolution with brutality killings. That is very normal practice.
Well, first, if it's a revolutionary organization, what does that mean? That's your question. And revolution doesn't mean violence. If revolution meant violence, then war would be revolution. There's nothing more violent than war, so it clearly doesn't mean that. Revolution doesn't mean coercion. If that was what it was, then the prison would be revolution. It doesn't mean that. Revolution means changing the basic defining institutions of a society. So let's take economic revolution. Economic revolution means moving from a society which has a relatively small number, just a couple of % of the population owning the resources and the tools of production and the warehouses and the factories, owning all that, and earning huge profits based upon the deed in their pocket that says they own it. And it means moving from as well, moving away from as well, a corporate division of labor, which gives 20% all the empowering work and 80% labor beneath them doing rote and repetitive work and not having that sense of self-worth and empowerment and that knowledge of circumstances which allows participation. It means moving away from remunerating people, giving people income based not only on property, but on power. How much you can take is what you get. That's the societies we live in. How much you take is what you... It was moving away from that. And it means moving away from markets. A system in which there's a famous phrase, nice guys finish last. It's competition and you get ahead at the expense of others. And markets have all sorts of problems of psychology and individualism and of destroying the ecology and so on and so forth. So it means moving away from one set of institutions and toward another set of institutions. And for somebody who believes in participatory economics, it means moving toward workers and consumers self-managing councils. It means moving toward a division of labor in which everybody shares in the empowering work, so everybody is prepared and able to participate in decisions and thus in self-managing. And it means replacing markets and central planning with a kind of cooperative negotiation or participatory planning of inputs and outputs. Okay, now setting aside the details of all those things, what we're talking about then when we're talking about revolution is going from one set of institutions to another. Now that can happen by numerous possible routes that you could imagine. It's not the path, it's not the procedure that's the revolution. The revolution is the transformation from one set of institutions to another. Now, in the modern world, the reality is those who say that the people who are seeking social change shouldn't be violent because we don't want violence, well, good, except for one thing. The world all around us is incredibly violent. So there's perpetual violence going on in the world of all different kinds. There's the coercive violence of poverty and of the denial of medicine and all the like. There's the violence of bombs and of police, even in the United States, which is a relatively seemingly free and non-violent environment. It's not. The inner cities in the United States are patrolled as if by an occupying army. So there's violence all over the place. And to tell the left that it shouldn't be violent on those grounds isn't very compelling, at least to me. The grounds on which it is compelling is that if you want to change from the institutions that we have to truly liberating institutions which get rid of class rule and get rid of sexism and get rid of racism and are non-coercive and so on, you're not going to use as your methodology violence in this world for two reasons. It tends to distort and to pervert your aspirations and to cause you to become what you feared and what you were opposing. That's one problem. And the other problem is you can't win that way. You can't fight against the massive might of modern military and police apparatus and win. It's a destructive, it's almost a suicidal approach to social change. The real way to win is to organize huge support and to have that support even percolate inside those apparatuses, the military and police apparatus, so they fall apart. And so it's possible to make change. So the answer to the question is a little bit complex, but not very. Revolution is the transformation in the institutions. We're for that. Anybody who wants values that they aspire to be propelled by society's institutions should be for that. If you believe in solidarity, you should be revolutionary. If you believe in diversity, you should be revolutionary. If you believe in self-management, if you believe in equity, you should be revolutionary because the existing institutions destroy those values. And so we should have institutions which further those values. So now you're a revolutionary. But that doesn't mean you're a violent, thug. It means instead that you're trying to transform society to new institutions.
Of course, we agree, most people agree that vision is nice and beautiful, and suppose we want to change. And I read in the IOPS mission, to achieve our goal is through building the seeds of the future in the present. Mm-hmm. Can you explain more how it could look in practice? And,
sure.
And this is first step probably how to achieve common goal.
Yeah, I mean, so let's take one example, of which we could take many. But let's take one example. I mentioned earlier that one of the features that I think would characterize a desirable economy, if we're not going to have class division, is that we don't apportion work so that 20% get all the empowering work, and by virtue of their position in the economy are confident and have information at their disposal and access to levers of decision making, and 80% are doing rote tasks and as a result are subordinate. And so you have the 20% over the 80%. And earlier you mentioned the Russian system, which was not, it made a revolution against capitalism. It got rid of private ownership, got rid of private ownership of capital, but it kept that division of labor. And so 20% ruled 80%, roughly speaking. A coordinator class was above a working class. It wasn't classless. Okay, so suppose you want classlessness and you want to get rid of that. That means you want balanced job complexes in the future. What does it mean to plant the seeds of the future in the present? Well, suppose there's two ways to understand this. One way is we create our own institutions now. So suppose you get together with other people and you create a film company. After all, you're filming an interview, so that's plausible. So you get together and you create a film company that's going to create films for purposes of information. Well, if you want to plant the seeds of the future in the present, then inside your company, to the best that you can, you will utilize your understanding of what the better future is in establishing how you organize yourself now. So you'd have balanced job complexes. You wouldn't have a boss who bosses everybody around and who monopolizes the empowering work. You'd have a situation of classlessness inside your institution. So that's one idea, that in our own institutions, we implement what we believe in. We don't have racist hierarchies in our institutions. We don't have sexist or class hierarchies in our institutions, and so on. But there's a second idea. So suppose that we are part of and working with workers in some big factory, capitalist factory. It's owned by a capitalist. It's not ours. We're not building it. It exists. And it's one of the oppressive institutions that we want to replace by a new kind of institution. Well, we can still make demands in the present. We can improve the situation in that workplace. We can make the income distribution more equitable by making demands around income distribution, and we might even make demands around the division of labor and around training and so on. So we can make demands even there, which try to begin to implement what we have in mind for the future in the present. These things are important so that we learn about these ideas that we have, whether they work, so that we provide them as a model of what it is that the future could be like to inspire people, and so that we benefit from them, literally, so that we literally benefit from these gains and our lives get better. For all these reasons, it's a desirable thing to do.
It's an interesting question to me personally. It just was election in Lithuania last weekend. And in the United States of America, we all know that the next president will be elected. So it's interesting, your position and organization's position, how to act, because everybody knows that any party will be elected, nothing will change. It's for sure. And because what happens in Lithuania, I know everybody agree that there is no left. They call themselves social democrats, but we're doing the same what is on the right. So it's the same as in the United States. And so to choose between Coca-Cola and Pepsi, somebody tell me. So what is a better choice? Less evil of two, or to boycott? What is anarchists doing? So
well, look, this is a big dispute among different people. And, you know, I don't think one side's right, one side's wrong. You can view this in many varied ways. So on the one hand, it's certainly true, for example, that neither Obama nor Romney, to use that as a case because I know that case, has anything to do with trying to implement a revolution in our values and in our institutions. They're actually both about maintaining current structures, maintaining and reproducing the system that we have. So by that measure, the difference between them is like Coke and Pepsi. It's there, but isn't it, you know. But then you might look at it differently. You might say, okay, that's certainly true. I don't contest that, someone might say, but then they might also add, but nonetheless, it is the case that there are differences and that those differences matter in people's lives. So that second person, the first person says, don't vote. The second person says, so we should vote for the lesser evil, which you described in your question. Now, I happen to think that, and then there can be a subtlety involved. So in the United States, for example, elections aren't done on the basis of the whole country's vote. Rather, they're done state by state, and you win a state, you get the state's votes. So in a particular state, if you're going to win hands down, it's called a safe state. So in other words, if the Republicans are going to win a state you know, by a lot, that's a sort of a lock for Republicans. And if the Democrats are going to win a state by a lot, that's a lock for the Democrats. So between the two positions, don't vote, vote all one candidate, and anybody who would be remotely like us in the United States is not going to be vote all Romney, so it would be vote all Obama. Between those two positions, there would be the person who would say, look, if you're in a safe state, if you're in a state that is either going to go Obama or is going to go Romney, then don't vote for either of them. Vote for a third-party candidate, a Green candidate, or whoever it might be. But if you're in a state that's close, and there might be a swing state, vote for Obama. Okay, so these are all positions, and they all have arguments for them, and they all have arguments against them. My own feeling is people spend a lot more time than it warrants disputing about these decisions. An election occurs, you go and vote, it takes 10 minutes. For most people, they think that's what politics is. Every 4 years I vote, and it's 10 minutes, and maybe I talk about it for a few months. But that's not really politics. So if someone is an organizer and an activist and is trying in a sustained way to develop momentum and movement for a new kind of society, whether they do this or don't do this or do it for somebody else is of marginal importance compared to all that work that they're doing. And so the real issue is doing all that work or not. So after you deal with that issue, hopefully in favor of doing all the movement building kind of work, then the last thing is whether or not you vote or not for Obama, and it's relatively, it just isn't worth fighting about in my mind. Now, if I'm forced to say what you should do, I would take that middle position. I would say, you know, in a state that's safe, don't even vote if you don't want to. Vote for the third party candidate if you want, whatever you want. In a state that's contested, it probably makes sense to vote for Obama. Why? Because, you know, Romney in the White House is as bad as Obama in the White House is, worse. Let me tell you, if you live in Lithuania, or you live in Ireland, or you live anywhere in Europe, or you live anywhere in Africa, or you live anywhere in Asia, or you live in the United States, it's plausible. Now, it's not impossible that Obama would be an even worse presidency than Romney. But if you had to make a bet, the bet would be that a Romney president for the next 4 years will be worse than an Obama president for the next 4 years. Why? Is it because of Romney or Obama? No. Just like we don't know much about famous actors or famous athletes as just an image. Same thing is true for these guys. And also, they're liars. So you can't, right? So what you can do is you can look and see at the constituencies that lie behind them. And the constituency that lies behind them is usually just two wings of the ruling elements of society who have slight differences over how best to reproduce the system. But in the case of Romney, there are elements behind him that are not so usual. They're basically religious fundamentalists on the order of what you find in, say, Pakistan, except they're in the United States, which makes them far, far, far more dangerous. And one doesn't want them to have any more power than one can deliver. So for the 10 minutes, you vote, and then you go home, and then you do work to change the system.
Come back to the National Organization of the Spatial Society. There is now discussion that will be some founding convention. How it's going? What's the plan?
First, the logic. We want to plant the seeds of the future in the present, so clearly we want to do that in IOPS, right? So that means we want IOPS to be a self-managing organization. Okay, but imagine that when IOPS was first forming and there were very few people. So suppose all of those very few people make all the decisions about what should be the program and on and on and on. Well, then that's sort of inconsistent with the aim, right? You don't have a vibrant membership that's participating. You don't even have a vibrant membership. In fact, you don't even have any membership at all. You just have a few people. Okay, so now go a little bit longer down the road. So now you have more people. You have a few hundred people. Still, it's not very much. So the notion was a very tricky and difficult path. The idea was, well, we need something overarching to give momentum to the local chapters, to the local organizing, so that they feel and they are a part of something larger, and so that they know that the work that they do will be emulated by others and that they can learn lessons from others, and that it's going somewhere. Okay, so that's one thing. But you don't want a top-down imposition. So what you do is the logic was you form this institution, this effort, a organization, you form it, and you keep the decisions to an absolute minimum until you get to the point where you can have a convention and you can have a vibrant membership, a conscious, self-conscious, and participating membership making decisions. And then they make decisions. So you move toward that over time. Without even specifying in the beginning what constitutes getting to that point. That's still an open question. But for example, let's say we said, you know, you need 5,000 people or 10,000 people as members. You need some number of chapters. And you need some number of, you know, some amount of shared, you know, activity and understanding of the commitments and so on and so forth. So then that would mean that for a period of time, however long it takes, you work to recruit people, to develop skills and knowledge and information and to share it and get to the point where you can have that convention. Then when you have that convention, you can have a program. an international program, national programs, and so on. Right off, if you have a chapter, so if in Dublin there's a chapter and has 20 people in it, they can form a program. You know, they can decide that they want to work on immigration, or they want to work on housing, or they want to just work on recruiting, or they want to do whatever they want to do. But as far as internationally, you can't have a program until you have that vibrant membership and that convention and that mechanism for doing self-management. So that's the logic. Is it going to work? I don't know. You know, I certainly hope so, and it's moving forward.
Maybe you want to say something for people who hear first time about Paracon or international organization, just few words how to help them to be involved, to be interested.
I honestly don't think that based upon a session like this, let's call it a session, there is no session, those people aren't allowed to, I mean, you know, they have no mechanism to talk to me. So based on hearing something like this, I don't think people should immediately decide, oh, I'm in favor of participatory economics and I'm in favor of joining IOPS and I'm going to go do it. I really don't. I think what people should do, should feel like is, I hope it's true, I hope that there is an alternative to capitalism, to racism and sexism. I hope that there is an organization whose features are such that I can believe that it really is about that, and that it really is going to act in a way and function in a way that's consistent with these positive values, and that it really would make my life better to be a part of it, that it really would empower me and enrich me, and not enrich monetarily, but enrich my life and my relationships to be a part of it, and that I would be contributing to the process. Okay, so if I feel like that, I hope that's true, and I think maybe it just might be true. Then what do I do if I hear something like this, or I hear about it, or I read about it, or whatever? Well, I look more closely. I go online, say, and read about the commitments, and I look to see what I think of that. May that's enough to convince me. If it isn't enough to convince me, then I find some people who are in it to talk to and to see what they're like and to see whether or not I feel like I can relate with them. And the same goes for participatory economics as an economic vision, say. If anything that I've said here or that somebody hears elsewhere makes them feel like, well, maybe there's a vision here, maybe there is an alternative to capitalism, then the thing to do is read about it. There aren't shortcuts. It isn't the case that it makes sense to just, because one wants it to be the case, one just acts as if it is the case. One should think about it. One should assess it. One should come to understand it. And then one's commitment will be much more real. So that's what I would urge. I would urge people to, you know, you can look, you know, it's so easy nowadays. All you have to do is go online and type IOPS and you immediately have the site. And then on the site you immediately can see the commitments. It takes 2 minutes to access information that can enable you to make decisions. You put Paracon on, you know, in Google and you search and you've got 1 million returns. I mean, it's incredible. You can see videos, you can see articles, you can see books, you can do anything you want. So you do it and you decide. And my comment would be, we live in a very scary world, at very scary times in which a tremendous number of people are suffering an incredible hardship, and in which if we look forward into the future and we're honest about it, we can see more of the same and even worse unless something dramatic changes. And so if that's the case, and if, you know, any sober assessment makes it totally obvious that that's the case, then we all have a real interest in there being an alternative, a viable way forward. And then it behooves us when something comes along and claims to be that and sounds pretty sensible, to assess it, to give it a serious look. So I hope people would do that. And if they do give it a serious look, I hope they'll find it convincing and compelling and they'll become part of it.
Yeah, and I forget to ask one, not question, but my suggestion, how to convince people. It's very difficult where it's alternative. What we are thinking, some kind of socialism like this is Norway or Scandinavians, what we can achieve, we believe that nothing else, you know.
You know,
socialism is not possible. It was communism.
If you go over to Sweden, you'll see that Sweden is sliding right back, and Norway's next. And you know, it's because the basic what Scandinavia was is the same system, but with workers having more power. And because workers have more power, then the distribution of wealth is better, and the outcomes are better. But as that power drips away, it slips away with those institutions, because those institutions are constantly trying to take it away, then you go back to the same hellhole. And that's what's happening.